I just loved getting this beautiful piece of art that lights up. It's hanging in my garage, and it just reiterates that, I'm 63 years old, and I remember driving through Las Vegas when there was nothing but neon, and now there's nothing but LCD screens. And so I have a lot of appreciation of the fact that this has really become more of an art form. And anything that we as Alta Robbins can do to support the neon industry to stay alive and stay viable and present such beautiful pieces of art to the world, we're just happy to be a part of it.
Neon lights, I'm baffled. Pick it apart like samples. Give me all I can handle. Light me up like a candle. I'm taming lightning. Percy got that lightning. Plasma in my veins.
Hello, Lightning Tamers. This is episode number 59. And in today's podcast, I'll be joined by Greg Wilson, the President of Alta Robbins, a leading provider of precision engineering solutions known for their high-quality valves. With a wealth of knowledge in valve engineering and a deep understanding of the needs of the neon industry, Greg is here to share his insights and expertise with us. Get ready for a deep dive into Alta Robbins Valves, where we will learn about Alta Robbins' connection to neon while understanding the intricacies of one of the most important parts of our neon gas system. This includes company history, choice of valve, troubleshooting, and repair questions. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in the world of neon and plasma, this episode promises to be enlightening and informative. And for our Patreon subscribers, a transcript will be available for this episode as well, whether on Patreon or on the blog. And if you're not yet a Patreon member, you can sign up for a 7-day trial with access to additional Taming Lightning content. Welcome to the podcast, Greg Wilson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome. I'm happy to have you on the podcast, so how are you doing today?
Oh, doing well, thank you. Yeah, I'm here in the Mountain Time Zone in the state of Utah. The weather's a little dark and wet still, but that's typical this time of year, but I'm doing well. Thank you.
Nice. And our previous kind of contact, I've bought your products as a user, as a client for my neon system and things at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. I know a lot of people in the neon industry buy your products, and just to kind of reiterate with our audience here, you've over multiple times have supported the podcast through sponsorship, whether it's episode 55 and 58. And so I'm really grateful for the support to help someone out there trying to support the neon and plasma community.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, the neon business, as you know better than I, they have their ups and downs on demand and interest and moving product and consuming product. So we're always eager to help and support the effort for wherever the neon still exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have a set of questions here, and for our audience here, these are questions I think will help everyone understand what the Alta Robbins products are about and the industry itself. I think a lot of people hear about your products through those who've been in the neon industry for quite a while, or in other industries as well. And I find it's very valuable as a product and as a service. But I think what I'd like to kind of explore here is, what is Alta Robbins, and do you have a bit of history behind where it all began?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the question, and that's a big question. There's always a short answer and a long answer, so I'll give you a relatively short answer.
Mm-hmm.
The Hugh Robbins created and started the Robbins Aviation Company in the early 60s, late 50s, and he was located in Los Angeles in the city of Vernon. And when his original intent for creating the design of the full line of valves that we still sell to this day was to cater those high-end bulletproof valve designs to the aerospace industry exclusively. And so that's what he did for about a decade through the 60s. And he never manufactured anything. He just oversaw the manufacture of all the parts and put it together. Well, at the same time, during that decade of the 60s, my father, Jim Wilson, was a sales distributor for other products in the Los Angeles area, and he picked up the Robbins Aviation line. And the only reason I mention that is because later on in the history, you'll see how those two things blend together. Then Hugh Robbins, he was old when he started, and he got old the decade of the 60s, and then he sold the company out in the 70s. Actually, it was early 80s. He sold his valve manufacturing company out to a big conglomerate called Dynatech. And at the same time, Dynatech bought my father's manometer manufacturing company that was also in Los Angeles. And the sole reason that they bought the manometer company from my father was because my father was the largest distributor of the Robbins Aviation valves, and so he knew a lot about that product. And so this large conglomerate holding company that bought up all these smaller companies, they combined the manometers and the Robbins Aviation Valve Company and the quantitative fit test line that Robbins also made, and put them all under one roof in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then they hired my father to be the CEO to run this newly created conglomeration of small companies. And he did that out of Albuquerque for the decade of the 80s. So all through the 80s, the valves were being manufactured under the name Dynatech Frontier. Now, unique to the neon industry, the INS valve, which is the specific line that mostly suits the neon valve use, as you already know, it was never really known to be a great neon unique valve. It was a great valve, but all the valves were intended to be used by the aerospace company, and that's why they were kind of an upper-end brand and a little bit higher price point typically. But then at the end of the 80s, Dynatech, the larger holding company, decided to divest itself of all their hardware items and go completely 100% into telecommunication and medical apparatus type of hardware. And so they sold off the Dynatech Frontier Company, and my family bought it back from Dynatech, who originally bought Robbins Valves and the Charles Merriam Manometer Manufacturing Company. But we had to move it out of their building in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So in 1990, the valves, along with the manometers, was moved to the facility that I'm currently in, and that's found in Linden, Utah, in Utah County, northern Utah. And we've been here since 1990. And so my father has passed away, and the other members of my family that were that were involved in the business have all gone on to other things. So I'm the last family member standing in what was once a completely family-owned operation, and now it's anything but. So that's kind of the long and the short. Let's see, did I get lost in my answer, or did I answer? Yeah. Okay, so along the path of that evolution, there were two major discoveries on this high-end aerospace valve product line. One was that the INS valve is an excellent valve for both metering control and vacuum applications, and that's why it became a natural within the neon community. The other discovery was that our little quarter-inch 314 series valve was a wonderful valve that has application in shutoff valves. And since the realization that it makes a great industrial valve for laboratories, we have promoted that for sample cylinder use, and it has become a very significant player in the oil and chemical laboratory sample cylinder world. So those two creations are relatively new applications for valves that have been around forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
That might have been a longer answer than you wanted. I don't know.
No, that was a perfect answer. To be able to hear that scope is great. Like, as much as people want to get to certain topics very quickly, being able to spend a bit of time understanding the history gives you a context of why things are very important. So I really appreciate you taking the time on that.
Wonderful. Okay. So
like from that background information, usually I'm learning here that you come into this company, which was a family-owned business, through that what interested you to work for work in this company or work with your father?
Yeah. Well, I started out even when I was in early high school with my family's manometer manufacturing company in the calibration lab, cleaning and refurbishing mercury column manometers, which since then have been long become illegal.
Yeah.
But I developed an aptitude for both the entrepreneur of the small business, plus living in that laboratory environment agreed with me quite a bit. And so my background came on so gradually, and it's been with me for so long that it's one of those things that I don't ever even remember having a conscientious decision to become involved in it because it interested me. Mm-hmm. At one point in time, I did leave the business to get my education, got a 4-year college degree from Brigham Young University, and I was thinking about going on to graduate school to go into the law field, but after interviewing a lot of lawyers, I came to the realization that I haven't yet met one that enjoys doing what they do. So I kind of abandoned the pursuit of becoming a lawyer and went back to the family business that I've really been happy with to give me both the flexibility of time but also the added responsibility of being in control of my own destiny. It always sounds wonderful to be self-employed, and it is, but when the problems come along, and they always do, being self-employed has a whole different set of challenges that a lot of people who have never been self-employed don't really appreciate.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that as someone who's just starting out on their own on their self-employed journey here.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot more to it than it might seem on the surface.
Yes, sir. So, like in your undergrad education, were you studying towards law?
Political science.
Political science, okay. And has what you've been exposed to help you? Has come in place to help you as you went to continue to work in your family business in Alta Robbins?
Yeah. So that background is very good to perform critical thinking and also writing and also interacting with people face to face. So, anyone that has a writing degree is heads and shoulders above other people because our world still necessitates the ability to communicate. But other than that, the political science aspect of things hasn't really transferred over. A lot of people, whether I'm out making a sales call or just in general talking with business, they assume I have an engineering degree, and I do not. I have no engineering background, but I have more of a sales-oriented perspective.
A third question here you've covered in your in the background for Alta Robbins, which is the connection between the Robbins valves and the neon sign making industry, and that was the INS series, which is because of its ability to be a nice metering valve, so you have great gas control, and then it's suitable for both high pressure and vacuum application.
Right.
And so a new question that's come to mind myself here is that I know from the various systems I've had to handle and work on for neon, many of them use a connection size of 1/4 NPT. You also offer the 1/8. Is there any sort of advantage between the 1/4 and 1/8 sizes for the valves?
All right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. The connection size of the valve body itself is irrelevant. It's just whatever helps facilitate the transition of going from the valve body to whatever it is you want to go to. And so if you want to connect down to an 1/8" OD tubing using a, compression tube fitting, it might be easier to find that particular transition fitting starting from an 1/8" NPT rather than a 1/4" NPT. So it's really irrelevant whether it's a 1/4" or 1/8", other than if you can get the transition fitting that you're after. Other than one thing that I'll mention, when we make a stainless steel valve body, and we have the same body regardless of the port size. And so an 1/8" NPT or a 1/4" NPT on a stainless steel valve body works just fine in either case. Now, if you were to select a brass body, there is a slight difference of which is better, 1/8" or 1/4" NPT port on that brass body for this reason. The 1/8" hole for the NPT port is obviously much smaller in diameter, which allows for a much thicker wall perimeter outside of that port. And that's significant on a brass valve because when we put a 1/4" NPT port inside a brass valve body, there is still a nice perimeter of brass around that port, but it's much thinner. And if a common problem that happens with a brass valve body with a 1/4" NPT port is people select a tapered traditional NPT steel fitting, and they'll put it in, and in an effort to make sure it doesn't leak, they'll over-tighten it. And as you over-tighten that tapered steel fitting in the softer brass female end, you'll go until it cracks. And it's a very easy thing to do is crack that brass body with the tapered steel fitting. And so to go back to your original question, there's no significant difference or advantage in an 1/8" or a 1/4" other than those two things: finding the correct transition fitting that you want to use, or being cautious that if it's a brass body with the larger port, you don't over tighten the steel fitting.
In most cases, you don't want to over tighten in assembling your fittings to your components. But this also kind of reminds me of something I've learned through some brief training through Swagelok, which is the advice of matching your materials, that you have a better chance of having things working well if you do steel to steel or brass to brass.
Yes, and that's very true. And I would add one other piece of information to that I think Swagelok would agree with is it's best not to combine different brands if possible. Like in the case of Swagelok, if you have a Swagelok valve, use a Swagelok fitting. And the reason why I say that is everybody's standards and tolerances are slightly different even within the same thing. You can have a 1/4" NPT spec that has maybe 5 or 6 thousandths variation, and it's still within the spec. And so if one brand leans on the larger side of the male NPT fitting, and the other brand leans on the smaller side of the female NPT fitting, that's why you get the variation when you go to install an NPT fitting, and sometimes it'll only go in a half a turn and it starts to snug up. Other times you're 3 full turns in and it's still not tight and you need to wrap more Teflon tape. And that's where those variations come in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they would agree with that too. What's actually kind of nice about Swagelok, not sponsored in this podcast, but they pretty much can guarantee, like you said, if you're using same products, their quality. At the same time, not to mix components within a product. So you have like one of those compression fittings. You don't want to switch it with something you find at Home Depot at a different company because they don't work the same way. And that's for the same reason. The threading and the tolerances are different. But we use a lot of the Swagelok components with your valve, and that's actually been very well for for use with your industry. At least that's the branding I've used with your valves, and anything else it can be a little bit questionable sometimes, but that's what I found in that's just my experience.
Yeah.
Great information.
Swedgelock is a huge company, and they have a lot of knockoff competitors. Mm-hmm. So if you are inclined to use a Swedgelock fitting, I would make sure it's truly a Swedgelock fitting and not one of the many knockoffs.
Yeah. I hope to be able to sell some of their products too, because my relationship with them.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And so the fourth question here, which you did also cover, was the most recommended for people in the neon and plasma industry has been the INS series. And we've gone over sort of the differences between the brass and stainless bodies. So what I want to kind of follow up with that is that I've noticed on the website, and I was looking at one of the defining features of Alta Robbins is in the following statement. The difference is in the seat. Can you help me and the audience understand why this is important for the design of the Alta Robbins valve?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you picked up on that, because it is a huge selling feature that we promote in all of our valves. And here's the difference. In a typical Swedgelock or Whitey or Anderson Greenwood type valve, they have a single stem that travels up and down inside the valve body, and they have a very small soft seat permanently attached to the end of that single stem. And the way that the valve operates is the stem with the seat attached to it travels up and down, and when you get down to the bottom of the valve, the soft seat makes contact with the valve body, and it closes off. So all of your metering capabilities, everything is within those two actions. It's the traveling seat on the stem, and the soft seat is very small. And so an average strength man can take a brand new $80 two-piece design needle valve out of the box, and if he wanted to, with his bare hands, without trying, he can over-tighten that seat and score right through that soft, small seat at the bottom of the stem, and basically ruin, what is an $80 valve right out of the box. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the two-piece design, and that's the most common that you'll find out there. Where Alta Robbins is unique is we have a more expensive, more difficult to manufacture, but a superior design where we go to a three-piece design. So we have a valve body, and then we have a transition piece that we call a bonnet. And the bonnet holds this large round seat inside of a cup, so it's supported on all sides and it's very large. And the seat remains stationary within this bonnet and the valve body. And then the stem is a third piece, which is unique, and it travels up and down through the bonnet. And then once the tapered stem travels low enough, it starts to make contact with the seat that's stationary, supported on all sides, and just sitting there waiting for it. So when the tapered portion of the stem starts to penetrate the soft seat, it's through that range. It's about a one full turn range that you have the metering characteristics so that you can achieve bubble tight, control at either high pressure or hard vacuum. And then full sealing doesn't occur until the flat of the stem rests on top of the plastic seat that's just sitting there at the bottom of the bonnet. Mm. And so that's why we say the difference is in the seat, because it's larger, it's more durable, but the design itself that reinforces that seat on all sides and holds it still enables it. Our experience has been that this design, the three-piece design with the larger seat, will outlast that smaller two-piece design valve with the smaller seat anywhere from 5 to 10 times. Mm. So a man can take our valve brand new out of the box and tighten it as hard as he wants, we don't recommend doing that because you're still going to, damage the valve.
Right.
But the valve will still be leak-free for a while until, excessive abuse has to occur to damage our valve beyond usability.
Hmm.
And that three-piece design is very unique. I'm not aware of many other brands that go to that effort to provide that design advantage.
Nice. That is amazing. Because I'm looking at you do have a little data sheet document about it on the website, which I'll link in the notes for the podcast episode, so they can look at what we're talking about. And that you describing that helps make much more sense. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, that dedicated sheet describes it pretty well, but it's nice just to hear it out loud for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to also tap into some of the other qualities that are listed. How does Alta Robbins ensure like the reliability and durability of their valves for both like the high vacuum and high pressure environments? I see something that's listed in the data sheet for the INS stating like the 4-to-1 safety factor. What is the 4-to-1 safety factor?
Okay, the 4-to-1 safety factor just makes reference to the fact that every valve has a rated maximum operating pressure. In the case of our INS valves, it's 3,500 psi, and that's on the high pressure side of things, of course. Mm-hmm. And so the 4-to-1 safety factor says that valve has been tested to ensure that you can exceed that maximum pressure times 4, and it may leak or deform or whatever, but it's not going to break apart and be dangerous. Mm. So you can hydraulically or pneumatically pressure test an INS valve up to 14,000 pounds and know that you're within that 4-to-1 safety factor and nothing horrific is going to happen. The new code on a lot of things is a 3.7-to-1 safety factor, but because we started with the 4-to-1, we just stay with the 4-to-1.
Yeah.
But that's what that reference alludes to. The other thing that I wanted to just circle back to that you raised the issue is, why is the INS the preferred valve of choice for neon out of all the valves that we manufacture? And the reason for that is because the INS is our lightest weight valve. All of our valves have a similar design, and they're all excellent for metering control and vacuum, but they get nothing but larger in the valve block and the capability beyond the INS valve. So the INS valve is the lightest weight that we have with regard to the high pressure side of things. It's limited to 3,500 psi, where the rest of our valve lineup goes up to 6,000 or 10,000. And so all of our other valves would work really well for neon also. You just don't want to put a 2-inch block valve that's good to 6,000 psi in line where all you care about is the hard vacuum. Mm-hmm. That's why the INS is exclusively the valve of choice for the neon as far as what Alta Robbins offers.
Excellent.
Going back, though, to your other question, not just the 4-to-1 safety factor, but in the valve world, there are build specs that what are your components spec to, and they're ASME-coded specs. And so all of our valve components are manufactured under a quality control system that includes ASME specs, ISO 9000 compliance, and all of the modern quality assurance provisions that most significant or legitimate companies adhere to.
Hmm. Now, one of the qualities I admire about Alta Robbins valves is they are simple to service. When is it recommended to replace individual parts of a valve versus replacing the entire unit to maintain its optimal performance? Yeah,
okay, that's a great question, and That's a big question that has a wide range of correct responses. And the reason why I say that is there are some people that use a valve as a shut-off valve, and they vent it to atmosphere, once a week. And they could, under that application, they could go 10 years without ever thinking about their valve. Other people, we have a lot of standards labs that use the valve continuously all day, every day, so the people are running it up and down, and they need to calibrate hard vacuum applications and that kind of thing. And so they have an internal maintenance protocol set up given their history and their trial and error of when are we going to rebuild this valve. And so the answer is there's no one answer for everybody. If the metal components of the valve aren't bent and the threads aren't damaged by removing and installing, cross-threading a fitting, if the metal components aren't damaged, they're going to last a very long time, meaning the only metal component that wears would be the stem would get a little bit loose after, probably 10 years of constant use, but it would take a heck of a long time for that stainless steel stem to wear so much that it gets too loose within the bonnet thread. And so the biggest component or contributor to why something needs to be rebuilt or cleaned would be damage, external damage. It gets bent, it gets dropped, that kind of thing. But assuming there's no physical damage to the metal components, then it's just the wear of the seat. And what determines the wear of the seat is really the operator's consistency of use and using it correctly. And for example, we have, like I mentioned before, we have a lot of quarter-inch shutoff valves that are used in the sample cylinder world, where the technician would go out in a refinery field with a sample cylinder and they'd plug it into their line and they'd capture a sample. Well, when they unplug that sample cylinder and take it back to the laboratory for analysis to make sure that their recipe in the plant is on point, the technician wants to make sure that they don't lose that sample, so he'll shut the valve off, one on each end, with his hands, and then just to ensure that it doesn't leak, he'll pull out his channel locks and give it a little tightening. All right, so if someone in the neon world feels the same way, that they need to close off the valve, but then they want to ensure that it's closed off because the tighter the better, and they over-tighten the valve, that the flat of that stem is eventually going to recess into the flat of that seat so much that it's going to eventually fail. And so someone could do that after 10 shutoffs of the valve if they abused it each and every time, 10 times in a row. But if the correct operation is learned and used, and that valve is practically fingertip closed, and you can feel the taper of the stem start to penetrate the seat, and then you can also feel the definite shutoff of when the flat-on-flat occurs. If you'll stop there, it doesn't take much. If you'll stop there and let it be closed off without over-tightening it, that valve could last 5 or 10 years. Now, the second part of that, though, is depending on which lubricant is used, the lubricant will dry out. And so it's possible that a valve starts to get dry, and you can kind of feel that a little bit if the same person's using the valve consistently. You can feel when a brand new valve shows up, it feels super smooth and silky. And then over time, that lubricant will dry out or get washed out depending on what media goes through the valve. And you can, if you are perceptive to the feel of the valve, you can feel when it gets a little dry. So in that scenario, it would be worth rebuilding the valve and putting new soft goods in, but more importantly, mostly just to clean it off and get new lubricant in there. And that scenario could happen for some people, depending on the environment, once a year, once every 3 years, 5 years. It's really hard to say.
Okay. Because this is probably going a little bit off script, but I remember asking this question before when we were preparing for the sales of Alta Robbins Valves on Taming Lightning store. And one of the things, and I think I may have asked that question previously incorrectly. I was talking about looseness. I think I have a better descriptor for what I'm feeling. So I think this is something that more people may run into. It is the feeling of having to make more turns and before we start to see the metering of a gas.
Okay, yeah. I remember you and I have had that discussion before, and I've had it with other people also, and it's a good thing to discuss. So let's do that now. And this is a different issue. I believe what you're asking about is when the valve is almost fully closed, but it's not. There's this nebulous area of about 1 to 2 turns where you can feel something's engaging, but it's still moving, and that scenario is very common, and that's when the taper of the metal stem, starts to penetrate the ID of the hard plastic seat. And when we manufacture that seat, we make it out of round bar stock on a CNC machine. The ID of that inner hole has a tolerance of about plus or minus 3 thousandths. Mm-hmm. And so some big users, customers of mine, they'll say, look, we want that hole on the large side so that we don't feel the taper going through because we don't care about that part of the metering. We just want to have the valve close and open, be sealed off or open. Mm-hmm. And we can accommodate that because if we open up that tolerance by about 3 or 4 thousandths, then that eliminates. You can sometimes hear a squeak, or you can feel a squish before it makes final contact and closes off on the valve. So that's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is we have just as many people who say we like the seats to be tight. We want to be able to feel the metering. And we want to ensure that when we want bubble tight control at 3,000 PSI that we have it. So we want you to make the seats on the small side. And those seats are the ones where the stem runs down and you can feel it definitely gets harder to turn the valve, but the valve is still turning. And it could be a full turn and a half until that flap makes contact. And so we, as a manufacturer, when nobody gives us a direction one way or the other, we kind of hit the middle with that. And so each batch, we try and make it so you can feel it, but it's not annoyingly tight. Mm-hmm. Did that answer that question? Does that describe what you've been experiencing, and is that basically what your question is?
Yeah, it sounds like it because I'm opening up the valve. And then for a moment, I'm watching for a change in the pressure, and then it kind of feels like I'm turning for a while before I see it. I think sometimes it's possibly the gas itself. I know that, the heavier gases may want to move a little bit slower before it starts to hit any of the sensors.
Okay. Also, there is one other thing that's built in by design, and as a safety feature for all of our valves, there is, when let's say the valve is closed and you're pulling either a hard vacuum or you're trying to install with positive pressure some gas, okay, mm-hmm. and the valve's fully closed and you go to back it off, there's a half a turn of dead, nothing happens for at least a half a turn, and that's actually by design, and the purpose for that dead space is when people, it's not so much needed in the neon industry, but when people close off these sample cylinder that I mentioned before, so they have 400 PSI of a gas inside of a cylinder that's closed off on both ends with one of our valves. All right, then they throw that in the truck and they drive it across town and they're going to deliver it. As the thing rattles around against other valves and stuff, those handles are constantly being manipulated by outside circumstances. it's a big safety concern for the people in that scenario that valve, even if it gets bumped a little bit, it does not open. And so for that reason, it's kind of a built-in safety of you've got to intentionally turn that valve at least a half a turn before you're going to have anything escape.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that transfers to all our valves. I forget about it because I don't use them that much, but that's absolutely built in. And so it makes it hard when you're sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for something to happen, and you're turning and it seems like forever and nothing happens, but that's why.
Okay. That helps explain a lot, actually. I think that's going to be something that when our audience listens to this, will kind of go, okay, now I kind of understand why I get that feeling.
Yeah. And the other thing that we hear from people that use our valves in the gas chromatograph is they go from 400 pounds positive pressure, and they want to measure it in their sensitive gas chromatograph, and they need to open the valve, but they don't want to hit the delicate machine with 400 pounds accidentally all of a sudden. And so that dead space helps with that also. And what helps with it even more is our 3-piece design, because in the 2-piece design, you'll be sitting there and nothing happens, and then that thing lifts off the bottom, and you've got all of it. And so, believe it or not, as frustrating as it can be to have that dead zone, at least it's consistently always going to be the same with our 3-piece design. So once the operator gets used to where it does start to lift off, that will consistently be the same each and every time.
Okay. There was one other thing that we had talked about prior, and I was surprised I didn't put this in our questions, but it was about directional, use of the valve. There's a direction there's an arrow on the outside of the valve, and does it, in the question that you have been asked before was does it matter the direction of that valve in its use? Yeah, no,
that's a very common and a very good question, and here's the answer: is there is a flow direction arrow instilled on every valve body. And if you have the option or the luxury of holding high pressure on one side and flowing out temporarily through the valve, then following the flow direction pattern arrow is going to prolong the life of the valve exponentially. Because when the valve is closed, all of the pressure is being held below the seat, and it's not working any of the O-ring seals at either the stem or the bonnet. Now, that's not to say, though, that the valve won't work equally as well in either direction, because a lot of people don't have the luxury of, well, one side is going to be dominant than the other. It's going to toggle back and forth, and the valve has to work well in either direction. And so I would imagine that's the case for most neon users, is they need it to flow equally well in either direction for either vacuum or positive pressure. And the answer to that is the valve is going to work beautifully in either direction. You're just not going to get the maximum amount of lifespan out of the soft goods before it needs to be rebuilt if you're continually, let's just say you're going to continually hold 3,000 pounds in a bottle, and you just arbitrarily decide to plumb a valve into the outlet that sees 3,000 pounds all the time with the valve closed. Okay, it's still going to hold the 3,000 pounds. The only difference is that 3,000 pounds is going to be forcing its way onto the stem O-ring and the bonnet O-ring constantly in the closed position. If you were to hook up that same bottle of 3,000 pounds at the inlet and the valve were closed, neither the stem O-ring or the bonnet O-ring would ever see any of that 3,000 pounds, because all the pressure is being closed off and contained below the seat, below the closed valve. And so that's, I had not too long ago, a couple years ago, I had a guy call me from a fire department because they had a leaky valve, and this was the exact discussion scenario that we had, because they had it plumbed into a 6,000-pound tank at the inlet, just sitting there all day, every day. Rarely used it ever, but it just was plumbed in backwards, and it eventually leaks that way. So it's going to leak that way prematurely. So for people who have the option, it's best to follow the flow direction.
Yeah, and that's fortunate in both neon and using gases for like making plasma globes, that we do have a directional, often from a higher pressure to a lower pressure environment. So we're not even exceeding on the side where the tubes are at, even past not even close to atmosphere in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have you offer, when it comes to replacing parts, you have the soft goods kit and the bonnet assembly. And I think you've sort of gone over those lightly, but let's kind of target back in on those again when we would want to replace either of those.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to touch on for sure. The soft good kit is obviously a lot less expensive, but it's a lot more labor intensive because you take out your existing components of the valve, and there's 3 major metal pieces to the valve, and then there's one O-ring that goes on the stem and one O-ring that goes on the bonnet, and then the plastic seat. They're all relatively easy to install, but the small diameter, hard durometer O-ring that goes on the stem is not very flexible, and so it can be difficult to get that installed on the stem, but people do it all the time. And so that's option one, is just replace the soft goods. You know that your existing metal components aren't bent, they're not damaged, they're not worn. You just need to disassemble the valve, clean everything, and replace all of the soft goods. That's a very good way to go, but more labor intensive. Okay, let's say that you don't want to mess with it, you don't want to have to deal with all that, or you suspect that maybe your stem got bent a little bit. It just doesn't feel quite right. Okay. It's much more expensive than a soft good kit, but it's less expensive than buying a whole new valve. You can buy a bonnet assembly, and that includes replacement metal parts that are the stem and the bonnet. But more importantly, it also has all of the O-rings and the lubricant and the new seat already installed. So it's like a cartridge. Mm-hmm. And then you can just take out your old cartridge, assuming your valve body is still in perfect condition, and it typically is, because it usually has fittings in it and lines running to it, and it never moves. So the advantage of this is you don't have to disassemble your whole line and introduce ambient contaminants into your system. You take the handle off, the panel nut lock nut off, unscrew the old bonnet assembly. There's flats on the bonnet, so you can put a crescent wrench on there or the correct size box wrench, and you can just remove that whole thing, wipe out the valve bottom if it looks at all dirty with a Q-tip, and clean that out real well, inspect the threads of the valve body, and then drop a whole new bonnet assembly in there, torque it to spec, and you're all done. You have, in essence, a brand new valve.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a good way to go. We have a lot of people that they don't buy soft good kits, but they buy bonnet assemblies, and then anytime a valve needs service, they just do that exactly.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have people send in valves for service or inspection?
We have people that would like to, but we don't deal with that. We don't do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
We're just not set up for that. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of keeping track of, and if we weren't so busy, we would consider it. But and most of the neon valves, especially, the price point is such that it's just not feasible. They end up spending more money with the additional freight and the repair and the communication and the paperwork than just buying a new valve.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah.
We just started our partnership here with selling Alta Robbins Valves on taminglightning.net/store. I do have some people who are saving their pennies to make quite a big purchase, so I'm excited about that. And would you mind sharing what your thoughts are about the partnership between Alta Robbins and Taming Lightning?
Oh, well, we're very excited. We appreciate the invitation. We appreciate your interest in the product, and you're representing your community well. And so thank you very much for all that you do there. We want to be a support, and we appreciate the business of all of our friends in the neon world. But it's hard for us to take, one phone call, one inquiry from here and one from there. And so it'd just be wonderful to funnel all of these requests through you, who has become so knowledgeable of our product and made stocking options available and identifying what possible consumption might go on moving forward. So we very much appreciate that. Years ago, we did a lot of business in high volume with the EGLs and the Daco neons and some of the big name players in the neon world. And it seems like a lot of those have consolidated or reduced their scope and their presence. And so a platform like yours, a one-stop shopping opportunity online, is very advantageous for everybody involved, and we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate a company like yours and people like yourself who make it easy, regardless of whether I'm presenting it on my platform or just calling in. I know a lot of places can be so busy that it's hard to make that strong customer service connection. And most of my experience thus far in my life and career has been through customer service. So I really appreciate how approachable the company can be and be able to reach out to you as well.
Well, good. It's a true win-win. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and you're welcome. Any fun facts that you want to leave our audience before we close on out?
Oh boy, that caught me off guard. I'm not a fun guy, so I don't typically have fun facts. But no, okay. Here's a fun little fact. At Christmas, my son and his wife, I'm way into motorcycles, and they presented me with a Christmas present that was this beautiful neon sign. It says Greg's Garage, and it has a big motorcycle on it, and it's in a two-color yellow and blue neon thing. I've never owned a piece of neon in my life, but I just loved getting this beautiful piece of art that lights up. It's hanging in my garage, and I have it on a timer, so every night when I drive home and it's dark, this is lighted up in my garage, and it just reiterates that, I'm 63 years old, and I remember driving through Las Vegas when there was nothing but neon, and now there's nothing but LCD screens. And so I have a lot of appreciation of the fact that this has really become more of an art form, and anything that we as Alta Robbins can do to support the neon industry to stay alive and stay viable and present such beautiful pieces of art to the world, we're just happy to be a part of it.
Nice. I love that. I got my first neon piece 2021, and that was just, it's sitting right in front of me right now. It's one of my contemporaries, Danielle James, and then I made my own neon sign 2 years ago and put it out on the front of my house. So it's addicting, and I love it. It's a beautiful medium. Yeah, no, it's super fun. It'd be a fun little thing to be able to produce. So that's a unique skill set. So, well, good on you for sure. All right. Thank you, Greg, for taking the time to be on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this, and we'll keep in touch. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you and what you're doing, and hope you have a great weekend. All right. You too. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Taming Lightning podcast. Music credits to the following artists in order of appearance: Retro by One, Taming Lightning Theme by Trav B. Ryan, and Walking by Roz Hobb. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you, Greg Wilson, for taking the time to talk on the podcast. I found it quite refreshing to hear from Greg, recounting his history with neon and share how he supported the industry. and I appreciate Greg's support with the podcast and partnership to make Alta Robbins valves and products more accessible, while maintaining affordability that honestly can be challenging to get anywhere else. If you have any additional questions, please leave a comment on the blog or email at percy@taminglightning.net, and I will answer them on the blog in the future. I'd like to thank the Pittsburgh Glass Center for supporting me as a place of research and inspiration, and the Plasma Art Alliance, Neon Makers Guild, and Facebook group Neon and Plasma Art for Beginners, where I have access to a well of knowledge and connects me to some amazing and supportive people. Please support Taming Lightning by subscribing on the newsletter on www.taminglightning.net or follow on Instagram at Taming Lightning. Other options for support are one-time donation through Ko-fi, spelled ko-fi.com/taminglightning. Or you can join me on Patreon for additional perks and benefits. I'll have links provided in the show notes. Feel free to share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.